Welcome back. My guest today, again on the mini-series of Unstressable, is going to focus on the topic of trauma and self-work. Helen Marie is a trauma therapist who focuses and specializes on helping people get to know themselves in a way that allows them to go through the challenges of life and the scripts that we build around life as we navigate through it. She is quite successful and popular on social media, unlike me, such as TikTok, you know that one, and Instagram, with her wonderful, simple approach to explaining very complex concepts. Helen's book, Choose You, is coming out May 16th, so just 1 week after Unstressable. So I'm going to ask you if you're going to order Unstressable to also order Choose You at the same time. That would be a lovely. I would love to see Amazon and other websites recommend frequently bought together, because Choose You in basically is an approach to help you find a way to understand yourself, but also to give you the courage to put yourself first when that's the appropriate thing to do. Without further introduction, I want to get into the conversation, but I remind you once again that Unstressable is a mission. So we're attempting, Alice and myself, to take 1 million people out of stress every year. And it is, believe it or not, an achievable task. You could help us by kindly making a simple choice. If you're planning to buy Unstressable, I'd ask you to order it right away, because the very first week or two of a book's life really determines if people get to know about it. So if you do plan to order it, please order it today. Unstressable is a very balanced view of my highly engineered mind and Alice's beautiful spiritual and feminine approach to things. So yeah, I actually think you will like it. In any case, I'm very grateful that you followed me on this entire series. It's been wonderful to meet other incredible thinkers on the topic of stress, which I believe is the pandemic of our time. Today's guest is one of the most wise, I would say, Helen Marie. So Helen, thank you for being here. I love your background. I told you as soon as you came on the camera. And we had a lovely conversation around that background, because I told you that my wonderful wife Hannah basically does the same. She tries to focus the conversation not on herself as a therapist. She tries to remove her persona and give her focus to her clients and anyone that listens to her work, basically, which I have to say has been quite eye-opening for me, especially in the age of social media where everyone tries to make the focus themselves. So can we start there and tell me a bit about your experience as a therapist, and what choices did you have to make that were maybe a little counterintuitive before we start to look at your work and choose you?
Well, firstly, Mo, thank you so much for inviting me on. I was really looking forward to this conversation, so thank you. Yeah, we did have a bit of a chat about my background. I think, like your wife, we train to not self-disclose. I don't know what modality your wife's trained in, but we don't disclose. I don't disclose as a therapist. It's very much about my client, so that they don't have another layer to me that they're overthinking who their therapist is, that the conversation is just us together. But you're right, I do write on Instagram and I have a lovely community of people, and I'd love to share more about myself, but I have to keep a check on myself the whole time that this is for the goodness of other people and not bringing myself too much into that space.
This is a very difficult choice, Helen, if you don't mind me saying. We live in a world where the currency of the internet is bragging. And, and while I find it almost noble what you and Hannah are doing, and many other great therapists, I would say, uh, it's almost counterintuitive to the way our world has gone, where you have to brag about yourself, you have to show up in a way that might not necessarily be you. And there is a, that I think leads a lot of us to, not me, by the way, I don't give a shit, but well, I mean, a lot of people tend to say, well, if I want to reach impact, I might as well play the game. If I wanna, I'll share openly a very distressing fact for me, because Unstressable has been written equally by myself and my co-author, Alice. Alice is wonderful, and she really knows her topic. But the media, whenever we're trying to be in, a podcast or on TV or whatever, will say, no, 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 we will host Mo. We don't want to host Alice, right? Of course, she's the younger writer, okay? And, Alice is a very humble, very effective, like really effective, but she doesn't want to show off and create that whole, noise of social media, if you want, because she's very effective at what she does. And it's quite confusing because in a very interesting way, she probably brings as much, if not more, to the topic than I do. She's really a very serious stress management expert because of her life experience, but yet the world is forcing us to be in a different corner. How do you strike that balance? How do you get popularity online when you're trying to do the right thing?
Well, firstly, I'm really sorry that's been your experience. That's a difficult one to navigate for both of you, actually, when you've written that together. And I loved that podcast you did together on the book, and you shared your favorite parts. It was a beautiful.
I love that. That was so much fun.
I loved it. I could feel it. I could tell you were. I think coming back to the question, I think there comes a time where you have to lean into your own acceptance of what the world wants versus what you want, and maybe come back to that acceptance of your own truth. Otherwise, it will just chew you up inside. And it is difficult to fight against society, the masses, when it doesn't feel comfortable yourself. So it feels very unfair when you've both written the book together. And I can only imagine the feelings that you have towards Alice in those moments as well must be very difficult.
It's quite an interesting challenge because, Alice and I were talking today about the fact that from one side, you should stand up for what's right. So we should simply say, no, you either have the two of us together or you don't, right? Which I think is the fair, right thing to do. But at the same time, she was saying, but Mo, if you show up alone and, 10,000 or 100,000 or even one person gets the message and it helps them become less stressed in the world that we live in today, then that's a worthwhile cause. And I think that balance is very difficult to strike. Again, I mean, for years and years and years, I told my team that I didn't want to be online at all. I actually, for the first 2.5 years of Solve for Happy, I think by the end of the first 2.5 years, I had like 80,000 followers on LinkedIn and 12,000 on Twitter and 40,000 on Facebook and so on. And I had not posted once. Like, I was like, yeah, I didn't want to. I didn't want to be the face of this. And then my team sat me down and said, are you nuts? Like, if you really want to make a difference, you need to play the way the world is playing, right? I remember Sonia, my wonderful coach and, partner in 1billionhappy.org, simply said, look, people don't listen to advice, to intellectual advice. They listen to people. People relate to people. If they don't see your face, if they don't know your story, they're not going to relate to what you're saying in any other way other than intellectually, and intellectual connections are not that deep. So I changed, but I still struggle with that. I struggle with the idea that there is the right way of doing things. Shouldn't we just, and like your background, the right way of doing things? Shouldn't we just say, you know what? Sorry for my English system. it will eventually work out. I'm not going to play that way.
Yeah, I hear you. I really hear you. And I'm interested in you saying about how you hadn't posted and weren't showing up. And I remember when I was meeting with Penguin, my publishing team, and my editor said, Helen, how do you feel about showing up on social media where you never show your face, you never come online, it's always just your words? And I said, I'm not sure. There's obviously some resistance because I'm not posting myself, I'm posting words. And they were very kind because they actually said to me, so my experience was different. They actually said to me, Helen, what you're doing is obviously working. So we're not going to be under pressure to change. So they basically took the pressure off of me showing up. So, and I really appreciated that because I wanted to stand in my position of, I am a therapist who enjoys sharing words. I'm not a marketeer. I'm not a social media person in that light. And I felt I could feel that soothing me, that I wasn't under pressure to show up in that way. As it's happened, I have shown up a bit more since the book before the book's release. But my natural habitat is not to be so visual.
Yeah. Before we talk about the book, tell me about trauma. We haven't covered trauma in this mini series, and Alice and I in Unstressable, we were very clear that we're not trauma experts. You chose to be an expert in like the most difficult thing ever. So tell me about trauma. Where does it come from? How do we recognize it? Some of your experiences on this work.
Of course. I mean, I have my own personal stories, and some of them aren't ones that I can share because they also involve other people's stories. But my own trauma is what led me to train as a therapist. So my own trauma led me to university again at a much later stage in my life to retrain, to give back the help that I'd seen that therapists can give to people who are struggling with trauma. And such a powerful impact on me that there's so much healing and help available for people that have been through trauma where I felt before there wasn't help. I hadn't realized. So I now have a wonderful international private practice, thankfully to my Instagram community of clients from all around the world that are all presenting with trauma. Now, trauma, there's different types of trauma. I'm sure you're aware there's PTSD trauma, sudden impact trauma, and then there's long-term trauma, relational trauma. A lot of my work I do is around childhood trauma and how what should have been in your childhood was lacking and how that's impacting you as an adult today. And I think I sort of take you on that journey in the book in a way to understand yourself from a younger perspective and how that manifests today. But allowing people the space to heal, to grow, to make choices where their life, their future can look different. One of the philosophers I studied at university was Heidegger. And some people love him, some people hate him. It resonated with me. He resonated with me purely from his perspective of we can't change what's been thrown at us, but we can change how we respond. And that's probably the crux of my work, is showing people the way that they have a choice to change now going forward.
If you look at childhood trauma, I'm going to ask a very, very weird question, so please don't blame my ignorance. Do you think an African tribe in the middle of nowhere, where they grow up with all sorts of challenges in the world, right? My uncle was eaten by a tiger. My aunt popped her eye while she was walking in the jungle, and they lost 16 kids while they ended up with 3. Do you think those people grow up and sit around the campfire and say, "My daddy wasn't there," or like my mom shouted at me one time, and that created a story or a script? I'm not undermining trauma, but I'm sort of asking, are we dealing with those issues because we have no other issues, or are those issues really what makes our modern world?
I love the way you brought in that example and then at the end of the sentence mentioned modern world, because I think our modern world is shifting. I think when you mention the tribe in Africa, we're looking at a support network, a village network. And I think what's happened in modern world is we've become so isolated. So we feel scared within our own self because of this lack of support and community. We're also missing this ability to help others within a community because we're becoming so isolated. I'll come back to the beginning of the question in a minute, but there was a doctor in East London who was noticing a rapid increase of cases of depression and anxiety, and his patients were incredibly isolated.
Mm.
And what he did was said, right, on, say, for story's sake, on Saturday morning, I want you to pitch up and we're going to go around to the back of the surgery where this dumpland, wasteland, and we're going to do some gardening. And he invited all of these people that were really lonely and had no community. And this group formed where they started gardening, growing, and building this community together. And their symptoms of depression and anxiety lessened considerably.
Mm.
So I think there's something to say about the beautifulness of community that we're losing in the modern world. Mo, I saw it in COVID with my clients that I was seeing online that were spiraling into deeper levels of depression and
Correct.
withdrawal, particularly in my late 20s cohort. Something was really happening with them. They were living on their own as well, lots of them. They were very, very, very isolated. And I couldn't give them the tools to do the things that could help. So it was just very difficult to manage their depression in that time. The moment they could go back to work and mix and socialize with people and feel part of something again, the symptoms lessened considerably. So I think there's something in that when we're looking at a tribal state versus a modern world isolated state.
I think you're spot on, honestly. I mean, the truth is, it's not only that connection to others in the tribe, it's the connection to being itself, to nature, to all of the animals, to the trees around you, there is something you feel safer, it seems, in the middle of the jungle than you feel in the city, because you're surrounded by all of those who share your same objective, survival in the jungle, or having a good time together in the jungle, or the feeling part of the tribe together in the jungle. I think that really makes a massive difference.
Yes, hugely. And I know when I've been on holiday before to Kenya and spent some time in the Masai Mara, and the community effect of these people is so beautiful to witness. The smiles, the happiness, the wanting to talk with you, the wanting to be with you.
Yeah.
It is wonderful. And I mean, I live in London. I could walk down the street and I don't get that same welcome from people around me.
Mm-hmm.
But there was such fascination to mix and be with people. I love the analogy you brought of nature, and the science and the research behind spending time in nature for trauma sufferers is vast. We just have to remember to do it.
Yeah. Yesterday, honestly. So Alice always tells me that connecting with nature, but also grounding and yourself and so on. I have to say, yesterday I had a very stressful, very, very stressful day. My mom's not doing well. She hasn't been doing well for 3 months now. And I love her very much. My mom really, in all honesty, probably one of the big reasons I look at the world the way I look at the world. And she's a very strong woman who's very independent and very stoic in many ways. But also on top of that, a few business deals are like, yeah, very painful and annoying. And, you get people to have a bit of power over you and they immediately abuse it, right? And anyway, I'm like, it is really stressful and my whole body is aching. And Hannah had a few clients to work with over in the evening. And so I called one of my dear friends who lives nearby, and we went for a walk on grass. Like, we took our shoes off and we walked on grass. My God, like, immediately that simple connection. And I had to text Alice and I say, I hate to admit this because the scientific method has no way of proving this, but this shit works. Like, it seems we're so disconnected from our nature.
Yes, and I don't know how familiar you are with EMDR. That's a trauma therapy intervention.
What's that?
So
I am not familiar, and even if I was, I want my listeners to be familiar. So
of course. Okay, so it's EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing.
Yes.
And we use it with trauma. And I'm almost 90% through my training of somatic EMDR, working with the body, doing the training in New York online with Dr. Scott Lyons, absolutely fantastic guy who founded the Embody Lab. Great program for somatic learning. Now, the founder of EMDR, I think you'll love this, Mo, was Frances Shapiro. And she's a psychologist. And she was stressed with something and thought, I'm going to take myself on a walk. She went out into nature and she noticed she started to feel better. But as opposed to just saying, oh, I feel better, great, go home and carry on, as a psychologist, her mind was working, what is it I'm doing that is making me feel better? And she noticed that her eyes were moving left to right,
Oh.
flicking up, down, across. And she thought, it's something about the eye movement using the left and right hand side of the brain. So she brilliantly went on and did huge amounts of research into this eye flicking and found that it reprocesses the brain. So in therapy, we use it with, we can use our finger to move the eye movement left or right, but it all started from her feeling better in nature and actually looking at what she was actually doing in nature. So I'm not surprised she felt better.
It is, but it gets me to think, because I really am. I mean, I'm honestly proud of myself. Leading into the publication of the book, I've had an incredibly stressful year. It's almost as if God or the universe, whatever you believe in, if I believe in God, so it's almost as if God is testing me to say, you arrogant little prick, you want to make to help a million people a year. Show me that you're a good example of this, right? And it's been so stressful. It's been so stressful. It's incredible. Probably the most stressful year of my life. And I'm doing so well. It's, of course you break every now and then, but then I'm like, yeah, chill. I can deal with this, and I sort of look back at the stress equation we have at the beginning of Unstressable, and which basically says that, like in physics, stress is not just the events and challenges that you face, but it's also your skills and resources of how to deal with them, right? And I'm sort of celebrating that I'm now older, because this amount of stress when I was in my 20s, I would have completely freaked out, right? Now I'm like, yeah, it's chill. Hey, I can hug that and move on. But it poses the question of, how did we end up here? Like, how did we create an environment where, like you say in Choose You, where everything else seems to come first? Everything else seems to be the way the world wants us to navigate life. How did we end up in this place?
Well, I think firstly, I love the way you said an incredibly stressful year, but I'm chill. And I was like, wow. And I love the way I'm listening to your mathematical brain with your physics
Yeah, it's a problem.
equation. And I'm thinking, to relate that back to therapy, we talk about the window of tolerance. I
Mm.
don't know if you're familiar with
Yeah. I think that sounds really familiar here. Yeah.
And it's so wonderful when we think about the window of tolerance, because someone with trauma, unhealed trauma, their window of tolerance is incredibly narrow.
Oh,
So
yes.
they can't hold big emotions. It pops out into their hypervigilant or down into their hypovigilant. So they either get very activated, mobilized, or they pop down throughout it and fall through into their very demobilized, procrastinating, stuck, frozen states. What you're suggesting to me is that through a very stressful year, your window of tolerance is actually quite large and wide. You can hold the stress now where you couldn't have held it in your 20s.
100%. You see, this is, I think this, let me repeat this because I think this is really important for our listeners. When your response to events exceeds the actual magnitude of the event, it's because you're responding to the event multiplied by your trauma somehow, or magnified by your trauma, right? And so you'd find yourself exploding because of a small comment from your partner or something like that. It's not because of the comment. It's because the comment triggered a much larger script and a larger story. And that as you increase your window of tolerance, as you work on yourself, you start to see the world differently. You start to, first of all, differentiate between the event and your trauma, but also put your trauma within the right magnitude of what it is, right? An event in the past that you can revisit and you can reframe and you can understand and you can focus on. So to me, this is very important for everyone to understand. But Helen, honestly, it's the most difficult thing to do for most people, right? We're constantly triggered and we don't understand what's going on.
No, and I think what you say there is really important, that why are we? And I think it's about coming to a state where we actually get very intentional about our choices, about caring for ourselves as someone we actually care about understanding those triggers, understanding why it's happened. I sometimes think that we show up as humans with such little understanding of what it actually is to be a human. It's almost like getting into a car and having no idea how to drive a car, but going for it anyway.
Yeah.
And I
A
think if we just
supercar,
had
as a matter of
a
fact.
supercar,
Yeah. In a very busy Formula One track.
yeah, the Ferrari you were meant to have outside your house in California,
Yeah,
that one.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, for those who didn't listen to that story, when I was chatting with Helen before we started about the time when I published Solve for Happy, and a TV team from Korea came to make a documentary about the happiness and so on. And they said, we'll come and shoot at your place. And they expected the chief business officer of Google X to have like a few Ferraris outside and a very large mansion, which is typical in California, to be honest. And, I was already on my path to completely really minimalizing my life in many ways. And so they all 15 of them, had to fit somehow into my 1-bedroom apartment. And I made coffee for all of them. And that was actually the opening statement of their program, that, oh, we were very surprised that this guy is not really the chief business officer. At least he doesn't look like it. So, yeah, so that's why the Ferrari. So go back. We're rushing around the world. We have no idea why we are so triggered, because we don't know how to drive the car at all. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, it is what I'm saying. When I work with my clients, and I work very closely with the body, I'm very passionate about people understanding their nervous system and how it works, so that they become in control of their nervous system and not the other way around. And from what you're saying, you've learned that inadvertently, or I'm sure through a lot of self-work as well, to understand your nervous system responses. And that tool of understanding yourself so that you can show up for yourself in the world in your human body, so that you understand it, is what I'm saying about we don't get into a car and just go for it. And I feel we're expected to be human without really understanding what it is to be human.
Okay, I'm not gonna let you get away with that. What is it to be human?
I think this comes into, for me, it comes into meeting yourself with a softness, a gentleness, an acceptance, a compassion, and then and dropping that expectation of self, or beating yourself up, or self-sabotaging yourself, or abandoning yourself, and then meeting others with that same level of understanding, compassion, seeing the humanness in us. We are human. We're not robots. We're not machines. We're real, living, feeling bodies. And I would say almost to get out of the cognitive and come more from the body perspective. And I often use a technique. I often use a technique actually with people that lose that sense of self, to get them to pat their body down. So literally tap their body and feel the form of their body, so that they almost come back in as oh, this is who I am. That, like a sense of self in that moment. A lot shifts for clients when they try that exercise.
Can I be a bit philosophical here about what you just said? Because everything you just described is what kids are. It's literally like you're self-compassionate, you're happy with life, you have no judgment of yourself at all. You're in flow, you're almost in love with everything. And then we develop that cognitive anchor in our head, like we anchor ourselves to everything that we think about. And we start to struggle. And I have to admit to you, I mean, me being a video gamer has really helped me in many, many ways, because I really very frequently, and not all the time, but I very frequently dealt with the most difficult situations of my life as a gamer. It's like, yeah, you know what? By the way, gamers try to do the best they can. And so I'm trying to do the best that I can. But you know what? If my mom's 85 and she's old and she's really, in not her best health, I can try my absolute best. But I don't think I have the ability to fix this. So, you know what? I'm going to do my best, and I'm going to try and be close to her, and I'm going to try to, make her feel the best that I can. But I'm not really disgruntled with life, and I'm not really, I'm a bit more of a kid in this. It's like, yeah, I have her now. I don't know very much what the future is going to look like. Is there any way to bring that back up in us, that innocence, that embodiment, that sense of play, that lack of self-judgment, that compassion to oneself and to others? Is that possible at all?
I always say anything's possible, but I'm drawn to ask you, and I hope you don't mind, that when you say those things, what sensations do you notice?
Oh, I'm just very elated, I think.
There's a calmness, isn't there?
It's calm, yeah. It's almost like this is how it should be. I know it sounds really weird. I think I'm sharing very much today because I've been experiencing a very interesting phase, right? Where it's not that things don't matter, because things do matter. But things matter in a way where you engage with them, not try to change them. I don't know if that makes sense.
I think what I'm hearing is you're saying about meeting something where it's at, as opposed to fighting it.
Yeah, or trying to make it what you want it, where you want it. Meet it
And you can't.
where it at. Yeah.
You can't. And it's almost, and I think as we get older, Mo, that
Yes.
I think we find it easier to lean into acceptance, lean into making choices that feel a bit easier, that we work we work with ourselves and not against ourselves. And noticing how I loved noticing, because I work with body language a lot, but I noticed how when you talked about gaming, I was like, that was your self-soothing, self-regulating regulating tool that's really effective. It regulates your nervous system. So instead of spiraling with the cognitive, the thoughts, the worry, it's actually what you did was self-soothe in how you know best. And I bet that your perspective was then very different to how it was when your thoughts were ruminating.
Yeah, for sure. I think this is the biggest advice I ever give anyone, is that, incessant thinking is really the biggest negative that we can ever apply to ourselves. Thoughts should be either useful or joyful. They shouldn't be incessant. They should be observed. I'm the podcast host. You're the guest, so we're going.
Remind me, yes.
yeah. We're going to go to trauma again. Tell me a little bit about how childhood trauma is created, is formed.
Well, I think it can be very different. It manifests in different ways, and some children have some horrific childhoods, and I'm so proud of those people for reaching out for therapy as they're older, when they realise that they feel they've been really neglected. So childhood trauma could be, imagine someone who had an alcoholic parent, or a parent with depression. And I do want to say here that for any listeners listening, I know that's hard to hear. And if this does evoke a reaction in you, to reach out to someone you trust, to not struggle alone. Because John Bowlby in the 50s, 60s did some pioneering work on attachment styles with our caregivers. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, around insecure attachment. I'm sure you are.
Yes.
Insecure attachment, around anxious, avoidant attachment, and secure attachment. But unfortunately, the statistics are pointing at around 40 to 45% of people are securely attached, which leaves a big proportion insecurely attached. And we learn from our caregivers how to ultimately survive. So the way we say someone had a very depressed mother who didn't show up for them, and they're a child of 3, they know they can't go to their mum for support. They know that they have to learn to cope on their own from a very, very young age. So they might withdraw, they might be very avoidant. And that starts to show up in their relationships as an adult. So a lot around attachment and that kind of those beginning stages to your life can really have an impact on how you show up as an adult, and your belief systems about yourself as well. If you've not had your needs met, particularly your physical needs as well. I have some horror stories of adults that have so much shame about their physical needs not being met as a child, and turning up to school dirty or, grubby, and then being, ridiculed at school for that. The ricochet is huge for that. Yeah. So they grow up with some shame about themselves that isn't theirs to carry, and grief around what should have been in our childhoods is a very tricky grief as an adult. And it can manifest in really detrimental ways, where people want to numb those feelings, and they might turn to unhealthy soothing techniques. And I've done some incredible work with people where they're no longer relying on those unhealthy soothing techniques, and the difference that makes to their life is vast, and to their children's lives.
A big part of your work is also about relationships, and how the person you choose really affects the way your system regulates. And of course, those attachment styles, the way your parents treated your needs, or your care takers, or if lack of, like you had no one, right? would be carried with you into relationships, and then they would create patterns and habits that are, first of all, unobserved because you think that this is the world is, and then, somehow repeatable, like so consistently, like, you'd find yourself dating the same kind of person over and over and over and over, and then, blaming the world for sending those people your way, when in reality, somehow this has become your world. Tell me a bit about your view on relationships and trauma.
Well, I think our relationships can be real windows into our wounds that we need to heal.
Yeah.
You can't escape those wounds when you're in relationship.
Interesting. Yeah.
So we need to become more self-aware within the relationships. Of what I work with in therapy is patterns, looking for something that's coming up time and time again. So people might find that they can't communicate with their partner. They can't, so they go into shutdown. They don't talk. Well, if you're doing that constantly, the relationship isn't going to flourish if you can't have a difficult conversation. People can't advocate for their own needs. So then they're going into relationship wanting a relationship, but not meeting their own needs in that relationship, or even communicating their own needs. That can lead to immense unhappiness within the relationship, arguments, lack of trust, particularly someone who has an anxious attachment style. They can struggle with trust in a relationship. So having that self-awareness around, hang on, this is a pattern that keeps coming up. Where could I go to explore this? Self-help books, podcasts, therapy. Start to get curious about the patterns that show up in your relationship.
And so what kinds of patterns, how does one observe that the reason a relationship is not working is partially due to their scripts or trauma?
Well, I think it would be that if you're having lots and lots of failed relationships, and then actually starting to think, what's my role in this? Why am I choosing this sort of person? Why can't I make this work? It's not always your fault, but it's about understanding why you've chosen to go so far down a path with a relationship. I think it's about understanding where you're coming from in the relationship with your background. And also, and I talk about it in the book, understanding the other. So if you're always anxious in a relationship and not trusting, but you're with a partner, so you can't communicate that, but you're really untrusting, and then you have a partner that's incredibly avoidant, who won't want to talk about issues, won't want to communicate feelings, the two of you can be clashing the whole time because neither of you are creating space where you come from a securely attached place. So I think it's about when you've got this, if you've got this happening time and time again, and you're not addressing it, now's the time to start addressing it. I know in my own relationship, before I trained as a therapist, my go-to if I was unhappy was to go very quiet. That doesn't solve anything. I can't expect my husband to know what I'm thinking. And then just very bravely starting to talk about that really upset me, or I'm struggling with that, and then allowing the space to be opened up for them to come back to you, as opposed to putting a wall every time.
It's funny because there is this meme going around social media that basically says the only common thing among all of your past failed relationships is you, right? And it is harsh when you think about it, especially if you're struggling with the pain of those relationships. There is an element of interesting truth to that. Not to say that there is anything wrong with you, but that you're part of this. The reason why it happens is also not just because life is unfair, isn't it?
Hugely, Mo. I think what you're talking about there is self-responsibility. Is actually not blame, just hang on, what part am I playing in this? And I talk about that a lot on social media, is what's your part in this?
Mm.
What could you do better? It's not just about the other person. What could you do to help the situation? What are you bringing that could be causing this issue as well?
Again, today is my sharing day. So I had this conversation with Hannah the other day, because I really have so much on my plate. I have so much on my plate. And it's almost regular that book publication week or month is almost, I get very close to burnout. And then
Okay.
I recover a little bit, and then end of the year, November timeframe, I get very close to burnout, and so on. And it's so interesting. I'm going to say this, in public, so that it makes people brave to admit to them their own selves. I was telling Hannah, because I really, really love my relationship with that woman. I was saying that before I had her, despite the success and then tens of thousands of people that wanted to spend time with me, and the actual thousands that I spend time with every year, I was still so lonely that basically I was telling myself, what's the point of spending time, watching Netflix? Let me just double down on impact. Let me work harder and get further. Let me, write another book, or let me take 16 more appointments next week, and so on and so forth, and start 5 other projects. And that repeated pattern of May, June, and November burnouts is something that you can easily use the same meme. The only thing common across all of the last few Mays and last few Novembers is me, right? But admitting that to a lot of people, especially when it is a tough time, we love the victim mentality. It's like, you see, life is so unfair to me. Every year, so much piles up. Yeah, so much piles up because you invite it into your life. Or every relationship, I get that type of person. Yeah, you get that type of person because your behaviors are advertising almost like a big bright neon billboard. This is the type of person I need in my life to heal.
I know. I really hear you, and I love your honesty there, and also your vulnerability that came across around that. I'm the common factor here, and when we're brave enough to start looking under the layers and looking at where can we get intentional with our choices. I work a lot somatically, Mo, so I work very much with the nervous system. Under the training of Deb Dana and the polyvagal theory with Steve Porges. And very much what we do is look at making the body feel safe again.
Mm.
And when the body feels safe, it's almost counterintuitive, actually, because we think to be safe, to survive, we need to be in survival mode. But when we're in survival mode, the executive functions of our brain, so the prefrontal cortex, basically go offline.
Yes.
They basically go offline, and we're run by emotion and our fear responses. And actually, what we need to do is make the body feel safe. And when we do that, our prefrontal cortex comes back online and we make far healthier decisions. But I think so few of us realize that we're actually running in survival mode so much of the time. Particularly, we come back to what you were saying, the modern world today. So many of us are not slowing down enough. I think we're scared of something, but scared of stopping.
Scared of not being good enough. I think that's truly one of the most common cases I interact with when people share their stories with me. We're constantly scared that we may not have realized our potential.
But I wonder how it would feel to say, I am good enough,
100%.
and actually this is what I choose, and I'm happy being this way. I think so often with social media, it's bombarded at us that we get into this false sense that we want that.
Yes.
But do we really? Do we really? A deep, honest conversation with self. Do I really want that? What
Yeah,
makes me
I
happiest?
normally ask and say, good enough for what? And
Yes, exactly.
and because yeah, maybe you're not good enough for something, but what is it exactly that you're not good enough for? And they'll say this and that. And I normally say, look, the challenge with the modern world is that we choose something we want to be and then try to be that. And because it's not us, we're not good enough at it, right? Shouldn't you choose what you're actually good enough in or good enough for, and then make that your life target? Like if you're not a good pianist, don't go on tour. It's as simple as that, right? If you're not a very good athlete, don't try to beat the professionals. It's as simple as that. But whatever it is that you're made for, that is your talent, that is your passion, that is your natural resonance, you're very good at it.
Yes. And no, on that, I talk about that in the book on authenticity
Mhm.
and around choosing yourself too, is following the things that you want to do. If you follow someone else's script, you don't show up in yourself. You show up how you think you should be.
Yeah.
I encourage people to live less out of should, but more intuitively. What feels right, not what you think you should be doing. What
So
feels right.
so difficult, Helen. I mean, I know that for a fact. I know that this is the ultimate truth, right? Because, when I always say, when your heart and mind disagree, I trust your heart more, right? Because your mind is working off a few facts, not the whole truth, and a lot of trauma, a lot of conditioning, a lot of scripts, right? But it's
Yes.
such a difficult choice. Like the whole idea of choose you, such a difficult choice. Because a lot of people will tell you, I will, but in 6 years' time, or I will when I buy my Ferrari, or I will when I, when I achieve this. Or they will say, how can I choose me when my partner wants A, B, and C, and poor, him or her are going through this and that. I'm not going to choose me. I'm going to choose them. It's such a difficult choice. And you're bravely saying it's the only right choice.
I think I'm bravely saying, choose you too. I'm bravely
Ooh.
saying,
Mm.
I'm bravely saying, you matter too. I'm bravely saying, create a life that feels good for you, because from there, you will show up for the people you care about in a different way. I've made some huge changes in my life over the last 5 years. And probably for the first time in my life chose me. And I know the ripple effects have been huge for the people around me. So,
Mm.
in terms of wider healing standing a chance, when you do choose you too.
Give me an example.
I'm debating whether to give a personal example or,
Come on,
okay, so no,
I
I'm not.
spent my whole life today, so yeah, you
I
can
know,
go.
I know, I know. I know. I'm a therapist used to not self-disclosing, so I'm going to use a different example. Um, I'll share the other example when we're not recording. But no, I look at my clients' work. So I look at clients who have been riddled with shame for years, who are in their late 40s, early 50s, and they are repeating the same patterns over and over again. And I have this theory, which I work on in practice, is I don't give air to the problem they bring.
Interesting.
So I'm being very careful here because this is a podcast and I don't want to trigger people listening. So I'm talking about self-soothing techniques that are not healthy choices, that people use to numb and feel better in that small moment. I don't give air to that. What I do is work on the client choosing themselves, working to understand themselves, making healthy choices. And what I'm noticing is that unhealthy choice that has dominated their life for years is no longer showing up. They're choosing themselves in a healthy way. I have one client who has made an incredibly unhealthy choice, self-soothing, since they were 12. In therapy with me, it's working. At 44, has said to me, we never talk about my self-soothing that's unhealthy, but I no longer ever do it. I'm making healthy choices. I think it's about what we give energy to. So giving energy to choosing ourselves, understanding ourselves. I have another client who, instead of a self-sabotaging tool, she now picks up a book and reads instead of engaging in the other tool. It's taken practice. She now reads for half an hour every time she has this urge to do something else. So replacing that habit with something else. Her son now reads with her. He's only little, he's 6, never read before. The two of them read. He's now become such a good reader that he's now top of his class in reading. He stands up in school and reads. He's getting so validated, complimented. How the trajectory of his life has changed by his mother making a healthier choice is beautiful to witness. So I think that's just a small example of choosing you, but with a big effect.
Yeah. It's so interesting. And believe it or not, I mean, you're using, of course, the very obvious example is if you have a habit that is hurting you, choosing you is to choose a healthy habit, right? I also have to say choosing you, which again, you write about very, very eloquently, is to set boundaries somehow, right? Is to be able to say, look, there's nothing wrong with me. Sort of like what they say on aeroplanes, attend to yourself first before you help others. So boundaries are also very difficult to set in the modern world because there are so many expectations and there are so many people that just, zoom through your boundaries. So tell me a bit about that.
I think boundaries is fascinating, and it's a very new concept, really, isn't it? That we talk about. We've given it a name, haven't we? Boundaries.
Yeah.
And I think I always laugh because I always say that we wouldn't worry about setting boundaries if people's reactions were always really heartfelt and compassionate towards our boundaries. But what ends up happening is that we feel like we're fighting someone to set that boundary. Boundaries keep the right people in. Boundaries keep relationships healthy. I really passionately feel that if we don't have boundaries, well, no, I'm sorry if I say if we don't have boundaries, we lead to burnout. We need to have self-imposed boundaries. I know I felt really mean.
That's so eye-opening for me. That's the point exactly, I think.
I'm so sorry.
No, but that's the truth, 100%.
And again, coming back to the body, I use the body a lot in boundary setting with visualization. How would it feel to set that boundary? Notice. How would it feel not to set that boundary? There's your answer, and very often when we're feeling overwhelmed, we're not setting enough boundaries. And also boundaries with ourselves, I won't stay up late. I will go to bed early. I will do a meditation daily. Whatever it is, I coming back to window of tolerance, but with a different analogy, is I talk a lot to clients about the water glass. When our water glass is full, one more drop can spill it over. So I look at, on a daily basis, what are the tools you can bring in that lower that water glass level? For you, it could be a half-hour gaming session. It could be a half-hour chat with your wife. Whatever it is about making sure you have enough of that in your day to keep the water glass level low. So that when the work stuff comes piling in, the family stuff comes piling in that's difficult, you've got room.
That's so interesting because in Unstressable we use the same exact concept. We call it the opposite name though. We call it to limit. So the model is limit, learn, and listen, and limiting is first by removing what's in the glass. Like, if you have an annoying friend that's hitting you over and over and over with, painful comments and so on, do you want to limit that and put it, take that friend out of your life, or just have a very clear conversation with them that says, look, when you do this, that's not permitted anymore. But also to what we call, we refer to it as reducing the intensity of your stressors and adding joy to your life. So if you're going on a daily commute to work and you cannot escape the commute, and it is a stressful commute, might as well add a little bit of music and or a good podcast, or if you're in public transport, a book or whatever, just to make that stressful situation a little more enjoyable. So you're not really taking out of the glass, you're adding a wonderful flavor to the glass somehow, right? And it's quite interesting because, once again, for most of us, we think that it is supposed to be this way. I'm like, what choice do I have? My work is an hour away from home. I'm just going to have to go to work in an hour every day, right? That's not the truth at all. I think there are lots of unnoticed or unconquered boundaries that we should set.
What do you mean by unconquered boundaries?
Like it's right there for you. You can set it. You're just choosing.
Right. Yes, I'm with you. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So again, coming down to choice.
Yeah.
And I love the way you talk about that and taking things out the glass. And what I would add there is when we fill ourselves up with the non-negotiable self-care and we lower that water glass level, our prefrontal cortex comes online in a different capacity, that we can handle the friend that's throwing the comments at us and find a way to work through that. It's not easy, Mo, is it, to say to someone, I don't like the comments you're saying to me. It's quite hard to have the confidence to say that sometimes. So it's about putting the tools in place where you have capacity to cope a bit better without being pushed out of your window of tolerance.
You'll be amazed, actually. So I tend to think that it is an attachment issue. So it's almost like a business deal, right? When you get into a business deal, and like one of the challenges I had with my last week is that the landlord of one of my businesses is becoming very, very unreasonable, and there is a point at which you go and say, you know what, at those terms, I'm not going to take it. At those terms, this is not good for the business, so I'm not going to take it. And when you reach that point, suddenly the landlord becomes reasonable. When you suddenly say, honestly, no, that's not how it should be. And I think with our friends, especially friends and anyone that you let into your life in a vulnerable state frequently, I think there is a lot of value in saying, with those terms, it's not good for the business, right? And what terms are favorable for the business? And am I going to put those on the table and tell my friend, look, I'd love to have us connect and continue to be close, but hold on, these are the terms of the conversation, right? I think that makes a huge difference. Or, by the way, not just friends, I think, and I say that with a lot of respect, even more frequently, your partner, the one that's, in your home every day, that's the one that, you think it's difficult to have this conversation. It is, but it's the most important conversation to have.
And again, a beautiful example of advocating your needs.
Yes, exactly. Choosing yourself too, as you rightly said.
As you would want your partner to say, Mo, this isn't working for me. Can we talk about this? Or I'm hurt by this. Or you want to be able to hold that space for them as well, don't you?
100%.
It's exactly. It's so important to open up those channels of communication, of honesty, transparency, vulnerability. But sadly, not everyone has those tools to do that.
Your book launches a week after mine, and there is only one top spot in the bestseller lists. Are we going to compete for that? I think you should take it, honestly.
You're very kind. I've pre-ordered your book. I'm looking forward to.
Oh my God! I didn't pre-order yours. That's horrible. I'm going to do this right now. It
No,
is
I listened to you on your podcast. You said pre-order it now, and I was like, I stopped on my walk and I pre-ordered it there and
no
then.
way. You're so kind. Thank you.
Did.
It really is. It really is quite confusing, honestly, because I remember when we started our conversation and I said about doing the right thing, right? The challenge with books is that their being a bestseller is not about what you wrote. It's about your marketing campaign. It's so awful when you really think about it. Like Solve for
Mm,
Happy sold, almost 750,000 copies globally. Never made it to the bestseller list other than in the countries that, in English, I must have sold definitely comfortably more than 500,000 copies, but only made it to the top of the charts in the UK. Because the way it works is it's all about the marketeer that takes over your project and tells the whole world that they need to order that book this week, right? Because bestsellers are counted on weekly basis.
yes,
So
I've heard.
so
Yeah,
much of life is wrong when you think about it.
well, let's hope our books reach the right people, Mo.
You should, you're undermining my point. My point is, my
I
point is, if you
know.
guys want to help this message to spread, then order Helen's and mine, like Helen did, by stopping the podcast now. But I will say honestly, as Alice was telling me today. Uh, but at the end of the day, if the universe believes that someone's time to learn something that helps them to heal them is ripe and ready, the message will get to them. Despite the madness of the modern world, I think what's right eventually prevails. The right message gets to the right person at the right time to have the right effect. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, let's hope.
I'm listening to Alice's words there too.
I can see how calm you are. I mean, there's so much in common between you and Hannah and Alice, who are so it's so chill and so easy. And we had that talk. We were talking to a big legal organization in Dubai the other day, and the first comment was someone stood up and said, "Alice, you're so calm. If you didn't say anything but just used that voice and tone, I would become a little less stressed already." And I'm like, yeah, I can feel that sometimes. It is so wonderful that we're all addressing this topic now, Helen. And I really am very grateful for your time and for your tips and for your work and your book and all of that you post on social media, because I have to say it's becoming more and more an epidemic, that whole challenge of how we deal with ourselves and choose to be calm and find a better life for ourselves is becoming so needed. So thank you for doing that.
No, you're so welcome, and thank you for having this conversation with me. It was an absolute pleasure, and I wish you all the best with your book.
Oh yes, you look at you. You're a good sport. I'm going to crush your book. No, I'm joking. I'm not actually, not at all. I actually really feel so blessed that we are at that space where something we can do can actually make a difference. Thank you, Helen, so much, and thank you all for listening. I hope you're enjoying this mini series. I really think that prioritizing our state of stress or becoming unstressable or choosing you is really the key to this current year and all of the stress that the modern world is putting on us. So whatever you do, first of all, please spread this conversation. I think a lot of people will benefit from it. Please do follow Helen's work, whether in social media or through her book. And please do tell the world about what you learn, because we can only reach people if you spread the message. And I'm always grateful, honestly, that you give me the opportunity through this podcast to meet so many incredible souls. Truly, that connection is what keeps me sane in a world that is more and more difficult. And yes, whatever you're doing this week, just slow down a bit. find a little bit of time to slow down. I love you all for listening, and I will see you next time.